tunas end, but in fact, like to tell my sub-rights agent that was no excerpt. That was actually a complete rewrite and a re-report, but I didn't see the money in the bank account. That's another story, I won't go into that. If you buy enough books, actually, I see it on the back end. So. Anyway, sorry, authors are shameless, you have to be okay with it. Anyway, so tuna, though, is really a discussion of fish as wildlife. And while that's I use that as a motif throughout the book. I talk about them, I consciously sometimes say animals, this animal. And it's funny, I've been noticing in the press that sometimes people they substitute animal in for mammal. And the distance that we've gotten away from wild animals, and it brings me back actually, who here is sort of familiar with Jeremy Jackson Daniel Pauly's work around shifting baselines? Great, and you would be surprised how many people don't know that. That's a great sort of thing. And what that theory puts out is that basically each successive generation has a diminished expectation of what abundance is in the wild. And it's the loss of memory that's going on with fish and fisheries. It's the loss of memory that makes people come up to me and ask me where they can get some nice, fresh, wild tilapia, which, as you know, is the farm fish from Africa. So my quest with this book in the end, I am a sport fisherman. I love fishing. I will continue to fish. But my quest in this was to try and redefine fish as wildlife, as something we eat, but not as something we eat as an industrial product, something that we eat perhaps as game. I think game is maybe the more operative expression. So anyway, I would be a hypocrite if I didn't read a little bit about sort of my involvement with fishing, because I have definitely killed my fish over the years, and I think it's a part of fishing, and it's a part of having that relationship, it's part of having that sort of game relationship. So I thought I'd just read a little bit from a portion of the tuna chapter that didn't make it into the Times article, and my apologies to those who, actually in the Times article there's a subsequent incident happened where I went tuna tagging and I had this sort of epiphany that, that red flesh of tuna, that sort of sushi flesh that we've all come to love over the last 10 or 20 years, is actually, it's not really food, it's an adaptation to cross the oceans. But before I came to that realization, I still went fishing, and I just thought I'd read a little bit from when I went fishing just after September 11th, 2001. I thought the fishing trip was going to be canceled, but instead I ended up going on a 100-mile trip offshore out of Brooklyn. People don't know this, you can go fishing for tuna out of Brooklyn. And I went on a 100-mile trip, and next to me was a guy named Steve who had walked out of Tower 2. And after he'd walked out of Tower 2, his wife said that he could go fishing whenever he wanted to. So anyway, so I'll just read this little bit from the tuna. It's a little brutal, but I thought it wouldn't be honest if I didn't sort of say it. So I was on this fishing boat called the Explorer, which no longer exists actually, but very big, powerful boat. Like the Explorer, tuna are all engine. On the line, they feel like no other fish, and one can almost imagine the Schwarzenegger-type muscles flexing and pulsing their myoglobin-rich tissue in coordinated, punishing synchronization. They are the one fish out there that makes a fisherman think, I don't know if I can do this. As my tuna sprinted off, I sank into a kind of squat, trying to shift the stress from my back onto my knees. This in turn caused a problem. I had worn extra wide pants to accommodate long underwear, but the weather was downright balmy out in the canyon, and I shed my long underwear before coming to the rails. Now as the tuna surged forward and I bent my knees in a defensive crouch, my baggy pants fell down to my knees. When I reached around to pull them up, the tuna seemed to sense it and swam even harder. My pants finally settled midway down my thighs. Steve came up behind me. You don't look so good, he said. I know. You want me to take that pole for you? No, I'm fine. You don't have to be ashamed, he said. Tuna are tough. I know. 10 minutes into the fight, the tuna stopped swimming, and I stopped reeling. Steve stood by my side and shook his head. Jesus, he said. Then all at once it turned to charge the boat. Reel, buddy! Reel, 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 reel! Steve shouted. I put my head down and cranked, trying to take up the slack. Jesus, buddy, watch out! I heard Steve cry, and I opened my eyes and saw that the hood strings of my sweatshirt were dangling in my fishing reel. I was about to be bound Ahab-like to my pole. Gingerly, Steve reached around my shoulders and tucked my sweatshirt strings daintily into my collar. Thanks, man, I said. Doing good, buddy. The tuna began swimming a broad, slow arc around the boat. It's the death spiral, Steve said solemnly. The death spiral diameter decreased with each big circle. 3 more circles, and I dare to peek over the rail. Way down, just beyond the glow of the boat's running lights, I saw a muted green flash. "Hey!" Steve called out. "We've got color here!" The mate came by and looked out into the water. "Well, that's screaming over that little thing," he said. The mate lowered the gaff. I held my breath. Sometimes when tuna see the shiny metal hook coming at them, they streak off in a ridiculous last-ditch escape run, sometimes tail-walking across the water before busting the line. But the mate dipped down agilely and struck into the fish's flesh. He tried to lift it into the boat. "Jesus," he said. "Not so little?" I asked. "Not so little." The mate was yanked onto his tiptoes by the unseen force below. Steve thought fast and grabbed another gaff and struck. He and the mate swayed back and forth like a pair of girls doing the hula. Then they each exhaled, counted to 3, and raised their gaffs hand over fist in sync. The fish rolled over the rail, furious. Steve shook the gaff free and jumped back. The tuna hit the deck hard. It was a yellowfin tuna, and true to its name, its dozen-odd finlets running down the aft ridges of its torso glowed canary bright in the darkness. In spite of its hard fight, the fish was still angry and dangerous and as big as an adolescent. Its huge, superheated eye met mine, and we both gasped for air. If the tuna had had a voice and the power of reason, it would have screamed and pleaded at this point. But the only expressive thing about a tuna is its tail. All a tuna ever does its whole life is crank its tail back and forth with great determination, even after it's caught, even after it's in the air. It never occurs to it to turn its tuna on, to turn its relentless tuna engine off. Bap, 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 it goes until the mate cuts its throat and blood pours down onto the deck. Bap, 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 bap. The engine runs down and then stops cold. "Congrats," said Steve. "Thanks," I said, and vomited.